Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Welcome back to the I Have the Right to Aspire podcast. I'm Katie, and I'm here with my co-host, Chessy. Aspire was created by the nonprofit I Have the Right To, which Chessy co-founded and where I serve as the executive director, as a space for honest, meaningful conversations about survivor advocacy, prevention, and what it truly takes to create safer communities. This podcast is about learning together, leaning into courage, and uplifting the voices of people who show up every day to drive real, lasting change. Before we jump into our conversation with today's guest, we want to take a moment to introduce two of our I Have the Right To student interns who will be joining us as co-hosts for today's episode. Chessy, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Anna and Aubrey.
Thank you, Katie. Today, we wanted to introduce and welcome Anna Turhan. Anna Turhan is a fourth-year Ukrainian student at Allegheny College, majoring in international studies in Spanish and minoring in psychology. She's interning with us through the Bonner Foundation's Summer of Service initiative, which allows students to extend their impact beyond the educational sphere. She's excited to help create a world where every child has access to a sexual assault-free education in all the possible ways.
Hi, everyone.
Today, we're also joined by Aubrey Carrion, a student at Allegheny College. She came to I Have the Right To with a strong passion for advocacy and community support, and she hopes to extend that same care and guidance to students and communities beyond her campus. Welcome, Aubrey.
Hi, everyone.
We're so excited to have both of them as part of the Aspire team and to bring their voices into these conversations. Now I'm going to pass it over to Katie to introduce today's incredible guest, Lisa Kristine.
Thanks again, Chessy, and welcome Anna and Aubrey. This is a special conversation for me because Anna and Aubrey attend where I went to undergraduate at Allegheny College and are also both Bonners, which I was a Bonner with the Bonner Foundation as well. So I'm really excited to have the two of you here. And I am also honored to welcome our guest, Lisa Kristine, to I Have the Right To for this special advocacy in action conversation. I was grateful to be on a panel with Lisa at the Giving List Summit, the Giving List Women's Summit, just a month or so ago, and I'm so glad that she agreed to be on the podcast. Lisa is an internationally recognized humanitarian photographer and activist whose work has spanned decades, bearing witness to hidden realities, including modern slavery and human trafficking, while honoring the dignity and humanity of the people whose stories she documents. Her photographs have helped make the invisible visible, sparked global dialogue, and inspired action across communities, institutions, and movements around the world. We are grateful to have you join us, Lisa. Let's dive in.
Thanks for having me.
Lisa, we're so grateful to be able to be in conversation with you today. Your work is not only stunningly beautiful and emotional and just so evocative of the human experience that we're so often not able to see in our day-to-day lives in the United States. And so I wanted to ask you, what brought you to share people's stories through photography and through photography traveling far and wide around the world?
You know, I was a kid that sort of grew up in a chaotic household, not very easy. And I have this really distinct memory of sitting in the living room by my mom's bookshelf, and I'd pull out these huge books about anthropology, and I'd see these people so covered in mud and feather and dust that they sort of resembled the earth itself. And I think from my childlike perspective, I saw them as totally unshakable, and I did not feel unshakable. And that's a memory I have from being really young. And Later in my life, meaning when I was still quite young, I started photographing and doing a lot of arts, but I also saved my money to go elsewhere because I wanted to go and visit these communities, and like any kid, would bring a camera. So really what was imbued in those photographs was then shared later, and people had a really strong response to them, and it sort of started me on my journey documenting people around the world in over 150 countries, but really to inspire unity. And then it was much later, in I think 2009, that I was asked to be the exhibitor at the Global Peace Summit with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it was really there that I learned about the severity of exploitation within the modern slavery movement. And that would kind of push me off on another trajectory of my work where I started documenting on the front lines. But it's been a long chapter, it's been a long journey.
Absolutely. And thank you so much again for being here. I want to start it off by saying that this is a very personal podcast for me because your TED Talk, Lisa, was something that people in Ukraine used to watch to learn English, at least in my school. And I remember back when I couldn't speak English so well, and we watched your TED Talk. Something that resonated so deeply with me was your photography and the idea of the candle that you had in people's hands. And for Ukrainians, it's a big symbol of genocide. The candle that we hold every third Thursday of November in remembrance of those who died in the 1930s. And I just want to say that this is such an incredible opportunity to talk to you. So I just want to go back to the question. So much of your work focuses on modern slavery and human trafficking. What do you think people still misunderstand about this scale, visibility, and everyday reality of these crimes?
Well, I think it's the largest atrocity that's occurring today in the world, and I think that people absolutely miss it. I think it's set up in a way that it's very convenient to miss it. It's hidden in all the things we're wearing and eating and purchasing every day. And it's very convenient to not be aware of the people in the supply chain or the people behind the statistic or the data point, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a misstep between what is occurring and what we know is happening, meaning data and statistics, and then kind of moving over to the human heart and recognizing that people are suffering, and that just because we're not seeing it in front of us, we're seeing these wonderful objects that we all have. We're not seeing the horrible circumstances of those who are making these objects that we have. I think it's innocent. It doesn't mean that I think it's okay, but that's where I hope my work comes in, because it allows those people in the supply chains to have a voice vis-a-vis an image, to be in an image and to viscerally impact a viewer. So yeah, that's very meaningful to me. And by the way, I'm an ambassador for the Stolen Children of Ukraine with the Emil Foundation. So it's very touching to know that you are from there. And yeah.
Thank you so much. I've just had an honor to work on some of the projects with them, and having you as an ambassador means so much because so many people in Ukraine know you for the art and for your advocacy. And I didn't know that you were the ambassador, but it's such amazing news in a way for me too. So thank you so much for your work.
Well, I had no idea that I was well known in Ukraine for helping people understand English through my TED Talk. Is that the coolest thing?
At I Have the Right To, we like to talk about the hidden strings that happen, and I love seeing these happen in action, which is amazing, Anna and Lisa.
She shared that with us before we got started. And I said, you have to make sure you tell Lisa that, because that is going to be incredibly meaningful. Lisa, I had the pleasure of being on a panel with you at the Giving List Women's Summit earlier this year. And we really started talking about the idea that a lot of people here like to think of it sort of as an over there problem, something that's not happening here, when really it is. And Chessy had the pleasure of sitting on a panel with her dad and Nisha, who is the director of To Kill a Tiger, and comparing the experience that Chessy had here in the States as a survivor versus the experience that a young girl and her father had in India, and the similarities that happen. So I just kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and how your images challenge that misconception and make it clear that modern slavery is a global issue with local impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I first started making this work on the front lines, it was largely elsewhere. It was in, Central and Southern Africa. It was, different places in Asia. Um, and and a couple other continents. But then I remember I came back here, I published a book, and I would go to the Dean of Stanford and sit down with them, and they all had no idea, right? Now we hear words like human trafficking and slavery, and it's common. We'll read it in newspapers. But back then, organizations couldn't even get funding. And I remember people constantly being surprised that it exists at all. But I noticed when I started doing the exhibitions of the work, which is my focal point, is to really impact people viscerally, that often when I showed them in the United States, people would say, oh gosh, well, that happens because of those governments over there and those countries over there. And it would infuriate me. People just didn't know, but there's so many things occurring here in that capacity, right? We have so much forced labor in agriculture and little, gas station kiosks and domestic servitude, not to mention the exploitations within the sex industry that are deeply embedded here in the United States, and which personally documenting that has put me in grave danger. So I think it's deeply important on two counts to recognize that, yeah, indeed, it is happening elsewhere, but it's happening in our own backyard, probably not more than, a mile or so from where any of us are right now, or maybe closer. And secondly, that no matter where it's happening, well, it's not okay. So even if it's an over there problem, it doesn't make it a problem that isn't also ours. And I think that notion of coming together, and, I'm really big on unity in the world, and that's my overall mission, is to inspire that. But, my bud Archbishop Tutu used to say to me, atrocities like this can only happen when people disconnect from one another, because it's the only thing that allows us to treat each other in such a poor way. And to me, that gleans so much wisdom. So I'm in a agreement that a fantasy that things aren't occurring here, that needs to go to rest, and we need to recognize that indeed things are happening right here and right now.
I think now it's easier than ever to disconnect, and so your photographs help people connect to the humanity of other people, and so I'm thankful for that.
Hmm.
I think even just going off of that, even though we are so connected using social media and just various ways of connectingness, whatever, I think that it's hard for us to really recognize what we're looking at. And so it kind of goes off of what you were just saying and kind of flows into the question that I was going to ask you, which is why you think exploitation remains so easy for society to look past, even when there is evidence right in front of us. And what does that responsibility mean to you as an artist and as an advocate?
That's a great question, and great thoughts. I think it's really easy for mere mortals, such of all of us, to other one another, and that allows us to compare and to make others less valuable, and therefore to abuse them. And this is a sad and sorry thing. And I agree as well that when we're using our devices, we are more, quote unquote, connected than other, and yet none of us are truly connected. And there's this deep emptiness and outright loneliness that we feel. I also think that within the notion of sexual exploitation in forced prostitution, et cetera, that people have this strange idea in their mind that if they pay for something, then indeed they have an allowance to be able to use that thing that they've paid for, whether it's a human being, young or of age. There's this strange idea that paying money for something allows somebody to use it. And that's a huge disconnect as well. I wish I had the answer to be able to solve that, because I feel like that's the real gem, you know? I think that we have to constantly remind ourselves that we are connected and that we are responsible for one another's suffering. You know, none of us are free until indeed all of us are free, so to speak. And that is, for me, a huge conundrum. And the only way that I know how to arrive to that portal is through, again, getting people in their hearts and recognizing that that our actions, you know, affect people. And no matter what that action is, no matter what we're shopping for, no matter, you know, where we're putting our money and what we're eating and all these things in which are tendrils into exploitation, to be constantly aware of that.
And I really appreciated a couple of minutes ago when you brought up Archbishop Desmond Tutu, because one of his well-known phrases has been something that has stuck with me throughout my journey as a survivor. And that has been, if you are neutral in the face of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. To tie that back into what we were just talking about, I mean, it is easy these days because we're bombarded with so much information at such a high velocity, 24/7. We have access to it all the time. I can see the young people in my life sometimes struggle to find the issue that they want to connect with, that they want to help with, or feel that they have even some semblance of power to help with. And so at the same time as we're getting access to all of the atrocities that are happening in the world, there's an increasing amount of powerlessness that we may be feeling. Now, you have just totally, it seems like you have so much power in the way that you've faced these atrocities in the world. You've eschewed so much of the safety concerns to be able to go out into these places that are high risk for you and the people that you're documenting. And you see this in your documentary from 2014. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you build that trust in a community to be able to go in and not just photograph or capture people as an outsider? Is there a way that you get integrated into the community? And could you explain to us how you work with a community when you're capturing their likeness in your work?
Whenever I go into any community, no matter what the work is, I usually sit down with the leaders of the community before I do anything. Because to me, the most important thing is to impart who I am, what my mission is, where their image is going to end up long after I'm gone, right? All of that matters. It's so important for me as a photographer to work in collaboration with people as opposed to seeing people as my subject. I always say actually that the people that I have the honor of photographing aren't my subjects; they're really my mentors, because I learn so much from their example of living. And when I go into situations working in the anti-slavery stuff, like when I'm on the front lines, I don't often get to sit down with the community because it's too dangerous. But I am intimately involved with the people that are working most often undercover within those communities. So activists that are working on the ground that have their imbued trust, that are able to let others know what I am doing in these very small windows of opportunity that I have to go and photograph, because the severity of that danger means that I have to be in and out pretty swiftly. So I might have 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. But then I have to be out because I can't be there when any of the traffickers or the money lenders or the managers are distinctly around. But to me, it's really about being of service So I always say, like, I feel like when I go out and do my work, I drop my nationality, I drop my gender. I'm just sort of in there as a spirit with this vehicle to hopefully elevate somebody's circumstance. And it's always important to me when I'm photographing, no matter how dire or horrific the situation is, to photograph somebody in their dignity, because that's what interests me, actually, not their it's not having pity for someone. It's really seeing how strong they are in that element. And the hope is that by sharing their image with others, that others will be willing to help them. That's kind of how I go about it.
That's incredible. And it is so interesting because, with art, you can't control the way other people perceive your art or ingest or feel your art as much as you can beyond the constraints that you choose, the lighting, the person that you're capturing, the framing. So it's great to hear you speak about all that you can do as the photographer, as the artist, to help people see what you want to see versus, sometimes it can be difficult because if you see people represented in a way that you have never seen people be represented before, sometimes there can be more distance put in between you and them. But I feel like the audience has to come with a level of openness that is supplemented by the art that you've created. And have you seen ever disparate reactions to the art that you've created, the photography? And can you explain to us, what some of those reactions might have been?
Well, I love what you said, actually, because I actually agree with you that once you make art, whatever that is, that then it has its own life. It's separate from the artist. It's then between that piece of art and the viewer. And I also think that anyone can walk in to see work without even thinking they're going to see it. Like, say, by chance, they walk up to it. They're not actually in an open space, for example, necessarily. But what's wonderful is seeing how somebody will become open, how they'll be opened by that person in the photograph, in my case. And to see them stop and pause and really take something in. I think the beauty of a photograph is that I often say it transcends language. It doesn't need words. It's visceral. And beyond that, there's this really great propensity to be aware. You're allowed to stare at a photograph. You can't stare at somebody on the street. You can't stare at some violence happening, but with a photograph, you have permission to really look. And when you are able to have that permission, your heart opens because you're not feeling as though you're imposing. You're allowed to have your experience. And I think that enables somebody to really land in their gut, to land in their heart and to have a shift. And I can see people looking at something for a long time, a photograph of someone, and I can literally see the wheels moving in their mind. And it is the most beautiful thing in the world to me. I remember once I was at an exhibition, and it was in Texas. And this I'm not being stereotypical yet, I am. Typical appearing Texan woman arrived to me, and with her beautiful Southern accent, she said, I have a question. What's your mission? And I said, that's interesting. Why do you ask? And she said, well, she'd been walking around this whole exhibition, and she stopped in front of these Muslim women that were completely covered. You could only see their eyes. And she said, I stood in front of it, and I looked at this one woman gazing back to me, and I realized how much prejudice I hold. And then she started to have this little tear come down her cheek. And she said, and then I realized that I love this woman and I don't even know this woman. And I said, well, that's my mission. So I think that the power is really in the people in my photographs. It's not so much the photograph. It's these beautiful people who are willing to allow their authentic selves to be photographed so that someone else can stand in front of them and stare at them and be moved to elevate their heart. I mean, I just think it's the most beautiful thing.
That made me tear up thinking about the changed heart of that woman that you were speaking to in Texas, because that's all we try to do in our work, is to share stories through, many different mediums, and to hope that we're helping people gain empathy or changing their perspective on, our specific issue, which is about consent, healthy relationships, and sexual assault survivors. And as somebody who's, just entering the film industry, it's so inspiring to hear your success with that. And all it takes is one person, which is so beautiful.
When I look at your photographs, it's exactly what I feel. Like even the small child behind you, sitting behind you on the desk or buffet that you have there.
Kofi.
You look at that photograph and you just, I don't know, it makes me emotional just staring at this sweet little kid. And like you said, it kind of opens your heart, and it gets, for example, that woman to say of another woman, like, I love her and I don't even know her. And so I guess my question for you is, we have Anna and Aubrey recording with us today. They're still in college. They have dedicated a lot of their college experience to service. I'm sure they're going to go off and do a lot of wonderful things in their own careers. So I want to ask you about self-care. Like that has to be the different stories that you've told already have like weighed on my heart and made me hopeful and made me sad. And like, yes, these humans are beautiful, but look what we're doing to each other. And so I don't even know if I'm getting to a pointed question, but like, how do you take care of yourself? How do you keep doing it? Even when humanity can be so awful to each other, and how do you keep going in your work and keep having hope? And what do you want young people who are going to go out in the world and do really wonderful, beautiful things? What do you want them to know to take care of themselves along that journey?
Yeah, well, two things, just because I realized that in my answer to people having a response to the work and changing within themselves, that's like a distinct example that I have such a keen memory on. And yet, if you do look at this boy behind me, his name's Kofi with the water droplets because he had been bathing at a well. But this image is so stirring. Indeed, this child is. But, I think of the millions of conversations that have arrived that ended up being about modern day slavery because of this little boy in this photograph. And so it just is another echoing into what is possible with art. Now, segueing back to self-care and all of that, what I have learned on my journey, because, I'm in some pretty dodgy situations documenting slavery around the world, and also can be very dark and depressing because I get to really see how organized and frightening this underbelly of society actually is. It's not these thugs. It's like hyper organized, and that to me is deeply frightening. Um, and what I have learned to counterbalance being overwhelmed by that, because honestly, I have the ability to do that, is to share it with my other work. So, if I'm documenting Indigenous cultures, I get to sit at the foot of an elder and stare into their eyes. That's a beautiful thing that is very uplifting. But I think for all of us that are working in industries that are, you know, sexual exploitation and all that is occurring in the world, self-care is so important. And for me, it is absolutely being outdoors. Like I love to go hiking all the time, and I love running, and I love books, and I love being with my family. And I think it's so important to balance as much as possible for all of us, especially as you're embarking on moving forward and creating your lives and in whatever direction you're going. I don't know if that answers as smoothly as it should, but I'm happy to go in it farther if you have any questions.
I think what you're sharing is so powerful because this question always arises, especially when you work with survivors. And that's something that I do as part of my service during my college career. And, I think there's so much truth to your words. And I just want to circle back a little bit to our art conversation because, even though I've never been a part of creating art, I am definitely the audience. And for me, it touches me in so many ways when I can, as you say, stare at photography, for instance, because I think images live in our mind for much longer than words could. And I think there is so much vulnerability to people that we stare at. And I think the change that you're talking about, it's also from us being able to be vulnerable in the moments of us appreciating art. I want to go back a little bit away from the mental health question, but I'm sure we can go back to it. I just want to ask you, in your advocacy, you're working with so many vulnerable populations and in your photography as well. So, how do you balance the need to tell the difficult truths with the need to preserve hope, dignity, and the humanity of the people whose lives you document?
Well, I think telling people's truths with their permission is really important, because when that story is brought together with a photograph, it's a double whammy, right? Because you have the image that to bring someone in the heart, and then you have those person's words to kind of land at home. Um, I'm a huge hopeful person. And I always say survivors that I have met are really my heroes, because they've been through so much and have, really elevated themselves, I think. And I, I, I mean, gosh, how can you not look at them and not want to wash their feet in rose water, right? And carry a little piece of them in your own heart so that you can learn something from them about tenacity and the resilience of the human heart, et cetera, and rebuilding and helping others and all of that. Survivors are the true, I think, nucleus of the solution of this entire issue. So I think their stories, the dire ones, as well as the hopeful ones, and how they have overcome, and ideas that they may have to shift policy or to shift rules or to shift consciousness about how others misunderstand exploitation. That there's such tremendous power in that, and I feel like in any way that I can help amplify that, well, then that's my honor. That's my absolute honor and honestly duty, if they would allow me to them.
At Allegheny College, we have the opportunity to serve. So our motto is like access to education, opportunity to serve. And so that's something that I've always tried to do, is lead a pretty altruistic lifestyle, always trying to help someone, but be mindful of the individual that I'm trying to help. And I am a senior and I'm about to go into the world. So as a young person about to enter the world independently, how do you think you can learn more intently by approaching others with humility and curiosity while being mindful and respectful? I think being curious is important, but being mindful and respectful is also a good balance. And you have to know how to ask the right questions and be able to help people in an intent way, but not, push their boundaries, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, I think that working with survivors as a visual storyteller, um, permission is the most important thing. And I actually think curiosity is one of the key ingredients of life. Actually, I think anyone who has curiosity every day has the gift of living very well. And I think coupling curiosity with humility and respect is the way to approach any human being, let alone a survivor. But it's really, I think the key things are recognizing for me that it's a survivor's story to tell. It's not my story to tell. And it's their story to, I mean, it's their choice. It's a survivor's choice to let me know what they want me to know. And to me, that's very important um, because their story belongs to them, and it's what they have, and it should always be treated with a great deal of respect. I think, there are many guidelines, I suppose, on how to interact and speak with survivors about their experience, and I think everybody should be very keen on reading those before meeting with a survivor. But I think what you've brought up, meaning humility and, curiosity and a kind of respect is the way to go into any conversation and allow that person that has had lived experience to, in some ways, lead it.
I was thinking about, as you were talking, just the regular news and how they interact with survivors. I had a friend who was shot and killed by her fiance when she was 9 months pregnant. And I don't watch the local news anymore because of the way it was treated in the news was really traumatic for those who are close to her. And so now anytime that something tragic and horrible happens, I can't actually watch the news because I think it's very exploitative, and it's not doing what you're doing. It's not caring for those people. It's just trying to sort of be at the top of the news cycle. And so I just kind of want to know your thoughts on how that should be done differently, how the stories that we consume and the stories that we give, like how they should be done in a different way. I don't know how articulate I'm being because I'm a little bit emotional from what you just said, but just, this is the way it should be done, where it's recognizing that person and seeing them as the one who owns their story and letting them have some control in it, and it being respectful, and how that is actually really the opposite of so much of the news that we consume on a daily basis, and how
Yeah.
that maybe is a part of how we're treating each other. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's interesting because I saw this documentary recently. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's called Manosphere. And indeed, it's on these young men that are trying to be these perfect young men that are horrible toward women and girls, and it's really negative and horrible. And I watched it to learn about it. But what I remember noticing within it is these young guys, are social media nuts, right? So they have these big followings. And how do they get the followings? Well, they do absurd and unkind things to others. And the more they do that, the more views they get because people can't believe that these guys would do it. So not only are they engendering their audience of young, innocent kids to become less innocent and more unkind, but they are doing things they don't even want to do sometimes because of the amount of likes they get, and they want to grow their platform. I think that feeds naturally into how the overall media has been for some time, and it's shock value. It's how horrific can we make this headline in order to get as many people to watch whatever news station there is, and to me it's deeply sad, and it's utterly disconnected. Um, and I don't know what there is to do about it because people are a bit like sheep with this stuff, and they just follow. They're not thinking that nobody. I don't think most people scrolling social media are in a conscious space. I think they're in a, they're in a bit of a vortex where let's go to this distraction to this distraction, and it's so naturally they'll see something crazy and they'll be like, oh my God, and like it's crazy. I can only speak to how I think we should all be our own vessels, our own navigators as we move through life. And for me, it's very important to always think of somebody else's honor as I would want to think of my own or my children. That matters to me. How I behave with my work matters to me. And I could not put my head down on the pillow at night if I were using somebody for my own, uh, false illusion of growth. Like, I'm not going to do that. And I think the only way to move beyond that is to kind of be in that space and to say, I'm unwilling to participate on that level because that level is so low frequency. It is so low energy, and sadly, very easy for young people to get into, sadly. Yeah. And adults too, right? Look at the news cycles. It's crazy. So.
I just want to jump in because we just started working on a post about inside the manosphere. And I volunteered to do it because I made my younger brother watch it because unfortunately he is just under the influence of me and I make him watch everything that I'm like, you're not going to grow up like that. And I'm making sure that you are under like good influence. And for me, it was a surprise that he knew all of the names of the guys, even though he has very limited screen time, that he knew what he was like, knew what they were talking about, their slang, their like own sort of subculture, like that he was well aware of it, even
Wow.
though he does not share their news. And just for the context, he's 13 years old and he's not even like in high school yet. So it's just terrifying to me. And the things that you bring up about it's like blind leading the blind or whatever the saying is in English, forgive me here, but it is just ridiculous how easily people get sucked into it and how from very young age it's very hard for them to get out of it. And it's harder and harder to make younger people watch something that's a little bit longer. That's not those 30-second clips of them, I don't know, picking up women or getting into a fight with alleged like bad guys. Like it's really heartbreaking in a way. And I think what you were talking about, like having their like sort of own space, being your own vessel is something that I wish more younger boys could like hear about because they are enough on their own and they truly don't need someone, some alpha male to guide them into this big scary world because we're all scared when we get out there and you have support of other people and please choose your idols in the right way and preferably don't choose them from the internet. You don't know these people.
You know, it's interesting because, Chessy, I remember when you were on your panel at the Giving List Women, and you and your dad initially went out to speak at schools to young girls, but then somebody had mentioned, go speak to the young boys. And I think that's the kind of stuff that can be done because I think kids, when given the opportunity to see things for what they truly are, will choose well. I really do. I think it's just not having those little buffers or guidelines to see something from a decent point of view where they're going, oh, duh, yeah, like why would I ever do something like that? Versus, scrolling through social media and coming across this good-looking chap who's spreading bad will, and just buying in. So, you're helping so much with that.
Thank you so much. And I mean, social media and the media that were shown through the news, like I complained to my parents during COVID because I moved back home and we started watching the nightly news together every night. And I said, it's only, what is it? It feels like 5 minutes. They only get like 2 minutes for each story that they bring up, and the rest of it's ad time. And I was so disappointed. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. They just dropped a ginormous massacre that happened in a country to women, children, kids, people, humans, and then they just move on. And I felt that that was just the totally wrong medium to be announcing these tragedies to the world in, and feeds that sort of like very, very fast paced news cycle that we've all become accustomed to because of the influx of information on 30-second reels. And, you'd think photography would be the antidote for that because it's not a long documentary, it's a photograph. But then you hear them say, well, you've got to have a hook within the first 3 seconds. And if it's a still photograph, it might not have that hook, but then you've got to add the caption to make sure that the caption can be a hook. And so we definitely are in an attention crisis. I personally notice myself addicted to my phone. If I'm feeling anxious, uncomfortable, if there's too much silence in my head that makes me start thinking about things, I will open my phone and scroll and just let that play in the background. And I feel like we're all due for a detox from that, but it is going to be a detox. It's going to be and I think we've reached our rock bottom, but it's speaking in like AA language. It's going to be, our breaking point to just go cold turkey. And that's going to be really hard. But I think a few of us have to be brave enough to do so, to start thinking slower and more thoughtfully and more deeply. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about now was the impact on education and the impact that photography has on teaching students to think more critically. It's brought me back to a class in college that I had where we sat for 15 minutes looking at a painting and then spent the next 15 minutes writing down everything that we noticed, that we saw, that we felt, that we smelled, that we heard from that still painting, which was just a replica of, an oil painting on a projector. But I only recognized the importance of doing that in the last couple of years, thinking, oh, wow, how beautiful it is to sit and be still and interpret art and life and sit with your feelings and your senses. And so I'd love to hear about your experience with that, with photography, the infinite amount of things you can pull out of a photograph, and how that we can encourage kids and the young kids and parents of young kids who might be listening to do so with their children to help combat this attention crisis that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's very strong. I actually find, with social media, with this scrolling, I find it so uncomfortable. Like I have a social media platform actually, but I don't run it, so I'm not on it. But when I go on it, I feel uncomfortable. Like I recognize it doesn't bring me this like ease. But we're also addicted to it. So back to what you were saying about slowing down and really, again, pausing. I think what could we all do really good for ourselves? It'd probably be stopping for even 5 minutes a day and really being quiet, let alone 15 to look at a piece of art or even a tree growing, and to just be with that very simple "I am, it is" moment, and allow for that. Allow for just being in one's body and the marvel that, wow, this body is functioning and the blood is going through my veins and I'm effortlessly breathing if I'm so lucky to be healthy enough. These simple things about being full of grace for what we have in our lives and that cause us to slow down in a world that is ever becoming faster and faster. I mean, it is so pressed. And I get the little hurry bug too. Like I'm somebody who does a lot in the day, and I notice sometimes my sense of rushing. And I think Octavio Paz has a beautiful poem on rushing. I can't remember what it is, but it's basically here we are moving so swiftly in life to arrive to a place ultimately where we can rest. And if you just slash that right down the center, just rest. Like we don't need all this stuff, all this noise, all these things, all these shiny, bright things to take a moment and rest. And yet I do struggle with this balance myself. So, yeah.
I was just gonna mention I took a class a few years ago about something similar to this conversation, and we read a book. Because attention spans are something that are widely talked about whenever we're talking about technology and going on social media. And there's this really interesting book. It's called Stolen Focus, and it talks about social media and how there's these algorithms that are keeping us hooked. And it's like, speaking of AA, it is like an addiction. But the algorithms are there and in place to kind of provide this addiction and this like need to go on social media and these dopamine receptors and all of the things that we need and to feel fulfilled, but intently like living slowly, we don't enjoy that as much anymore because we have these instant notifications that are telling us that we're pretty or telling us that somebody liked something that we posted, and it's kind of just like that instant gratification that we shouldn't need to feel human. We should be able to go outside and just smell the flowers and just think and breathe, and kind of goes along with what you were saying. But
That was such a beautiful addition. And I wrote down the book. I'm going to read it because I think I need it. But Lisa, your emphasis on consent and permission from the subjects of your work and the survivor subjects of your work reminded me of the sort of conflicting, something that's been very conflicting in my mind as a survivor who also has shared her story publicly. I'm constantly looking for ways that we can share survivors' stories that are impactful and visceral and can help change people's hearts and minds while not impacting the survivor who has to lay down their hearts and bodies and go back into those traumatic moments. And one of the ways that we've been trying to do that at I Have the Right To is by doing a traveling exhibit of survivors' outfits and little pieces from their childhood or times of the time that they were abused, and just a quick blurb. But we have a setup where we, go into a dark room and set up these objects and these story cards. But there's something so impactful about hearing from real live human beings. And so I'd love to hear, are there any different ways that you accompany the works that you exhibit? And I know you've had an incredible exhibit at the Vatican, and your work has been shown all around the world. Is there a way that you specifically accompany those exhibits with information or descriptions or details about the subjects to help impact people?
Yes, it depends on the type of exhibition, but I always have a caption. A lot of the work in the exhibition is less like it's personal, but it's not personal to the photograph, because it's about the overall thing. Like it might be, something of a fellow at the bottom of a gold mine, like a kid that's really knocked up and broken because he fell down. And it might talk about, the miners who go there with their original intent to find work, and they learn that they can't be actually allowed to work unless they have a certification. So then a trafficker approaches them and offers them a job in these illegal mines where they fall to their death frequently. And it's something that's much more eloquent than what I'm saying, but that gives you a sense of vulnerability of what is occurring, but for an overall body of work. And sometimes there'll be direct stories. I don't know if you're familiar with a woman named Holly Smith. She's from here in the United States, and she was trafficked from a Middle America shopping mall when she was just 14. So I'll accompany it with her story because she is an advocate and that's her momentum, that's her vehicle. And that's a very powerful vehicle because she's from the States. She has very blonde hair and blue eyes, which I think is really important because so many people think it doesn't happen here. And she speaks to a lot of vulnerable kids in the room. And sometimes when I give these presentations, which of course are deeply imbued with storytelling, I'll have people come to me after telling me about some situation in which they'd been trafficked that they didn't even realize they were trafficked until I told that story. So the stories, to your point, are deeply vulnerable, but also they belong to the owner of that story. And when that person is comfortable and willing to share that story can have a ripple effect to help other people. So I think whatever we accompany with our work, and that sounds like your exhibition's amazing, by the way, I want to see it. I think the power is really there because you're combining elements of something that's viscerally moving along with stories and facts and some ways to engage in alleviating this issue, right? So there's like three things being hit on the way, and I think that's deeply important.
I just want to jump in while we're talking about human trafficking. I think one of the most powerful things that I've heard during Polaris training that I had to do for working with the survivors is that it is not an abstract issue that happens out there, and it's not in the way that someone steals you in a car or any other thing that maybe media portrays it as. And I think, Lisa, you talk a lot about it in your work too, that it's someone you know, it's someone you trust, it happens over time. And I think it's so important that you share this message with people, because the fact that you're talking about the more people know about it and the way that it's happening, the more preventive it is. And I think there is so much power in that too.
Yeah, they say like over 70% of people that are trafficking victims of sexual exploitation don't even know that they're being trafficked. So I think, this is a really deep-seated thing, because it becomes somebody's entire life and lifestyle, and they don't have room to compare to other people who may have a more, a safer existence and a healthier existence, and yeah, I think that it's very important. The more young people know how it happens, and that it's very easy to have happen, and how to recognize the signs, and how to use social media and different platforms on our telephones that all our children have. All of this matters.
Do you have anything to say to the people who will actively avoid looking at photographs of people who have been harmed, or people in who don't want to have anything to do with, or don't want their children to listen to or hear any stories of hardship because they think it's traumatizing to their children or it's traumatizing to them, that avoid these stories of the people in their communities, even not just, people from around the world, but who will ignore the indignities and the mistreatment of people in their communities because it's too difficult for them?
Yeah, I really think people that don't want their children to see or understand or know that these horrible things happen to other young people their own age, these kids' age, are trying to protect their children. But I think what they're doing is they're setting up their children for a possible very scary and negative experience, because they have no knowledge of the very intrepid and coercive ways that traffickers work, behaving as though they're young people, getting to know their child on a platform, and then landing those kids in a very, very unsafe and hazardous environment. And I think that probably parents are trying to protect their kids, but actually it's not protecting them. It's not protecting them.
For my I have the right to internship, I actually just read something. It doesn't have much to do about child sexual trafficking, rather sexual grooming behaviors and parents' abilities to recognize these sexual grooming behaviors. And in this study that they performed, I actually have it right here. In this study that they performed, a lot of parents couldn't recognize that their child was being groomed, or even in like a series, the basis of the study was that each of the parents were given this form, and it had different like essays in it, and they read the essays, and then they determined whether or not it was sexual grooming or not. And a lot of the parents didn't realize that that's what sexual grooming was. And I just think that
Yeah.
um recognition is so important too, and parents should be able to recognize these things, even though it's hard to sometimes, but recognition is really important, like I was just saying.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just was looking online, and I don't know if you all saw that film that Jeffrey Dean Brown did, called Sold. It was on a girl that was trafficked from Nepal down to Sanagachi in Calcutta. And I was involved with that film, but that the book on which it is written is the number one banned book in the United States. And I think, wow, that is incredible to me, that this story which though is fiction, is based on so many different interviews on young people that had been trafficked and sold to men and raped so many times, and many not surviving, and that would be a banned book. It breaks my heart because it is evidence of what is occurring in the world, and you cannot pretend it doesn't exist. It's so sad to me.
And I think a lot of we've been talking about today is, the social media and how many things we're exposed to. But what I've noticed as a Ukrainian, and it goes really well with what you were saying, is that you get disincentivized. Like my feed mostly is, war. And at some point, I catch myself not feeling empathy anymore. And ignorance at some point, like, feels like a bliss, And what you're
Mhm.
talking about, it is so heartbreaking because when we're talking about protecting children, we often forget that they're already human beings who can process these emotions, even if they're hard. And these conversations that need to be held, like, they're important in long term. They're not something that you should be able to see maybe on social media as much, because then you don't feel so connected to the stories. And I just wanted to like circle back to what we've been talking about. Like, if you have like a younger sibling or maybe a younger child, I think it's so important to sit down with them and maybe not today, but someday talk to them about the important things that we're talking about today, because you can't protect them if they're unaware of these things.
Yeah, it's so important. I have to say, I have 3 kids. We have 3, and now they're old. I mean, the youngest one is 18, but all of them know so much about this issue. And, one time my daughter I live in Marin County, which is a pretty, nice area. And she was at a little mall, and some guy tried to get her in a car, and she put her finger like, you dirty old man. And she immediately called the police and took a photo of his car and his license. And I mean, she had no fear around it. She knew exactly how to handle it. And she called me right away. But there was no ability to be coerced to come have a piece of candy in a car, and that's
That just
because
gave
she
me goosebumps
knows.
all over my body because my kids are still young, and every single day, like, I just wanna give them those tools. Like, I want them to know, like, what to look out for and to trust themselves, and the more we don't talk about this, the more darkness we create. The more we talk about it, the more we shed light on it. We have to talk about it. That's the only way we can protect our children. I've represented hundreds of survivors as an attorney. Silence was never a friend to anybody. And if we actually talked about these things, it empowers young people. And Anna, you're right. Young kids, they get it. They understand. They need information. That is what's going to empower them. You are not putting them at risk because you're telling them about it. Like if they're about to cross the street, you say, look both ways, right? Like it's the same concept of helping them be aware. Like, yes, all of us would rather this not be a thing, but it is. It's a part of the world in every way, and we have to protect our children. And I think having conversations, that's why I Have the Right To brings young people into all of these conversations to help them to think critically about it, and then help them, like Anna and Aubrey, you're doing, influence their peers who then influence peers that are younger, and the ripple effect, continues. So, I think as we wrap up, we just have 2 more questions that we always like to ask our guests. So the first one is, what's giving you hope? What's something in your life today that you're seeing, or something that you experienced, or really anything that's kind of giving you hope in the moment?
I think what gives me hope is the survivors that I meet that come and share their stories and place advocacy to help others. I think that the topic, which has for so long been very quiet and very unbelievable, is now something more at the forefront of conversation. This does not mean at all that I think we are in a place of small numbers or diminishing numbers or conquering this beast. But I think the more that we talk about it and the more that the knowledge is out there and people are informed, the greater ability we have to overcome this.
Amazing. And the second question we like to ask our guests is, the organization is called I Have the Right To, and we'd like to ask our guests, what would your I Have the Right To statement be today?
I have the right to be wholehearted and forthcoming and to live my life with the greatest empowerment I can.
Lisa, thank you for sharing your perspective, your work, and your commitment to human dignity with us today. Your work reminds us that bearing witness can be an act of advocacy, and that photography, when grounded in trust and respect, can help make the invisible visible and inspire real change.
And to everyone listening, if today's episode resonated with you, we invite you to share it with someone in your life who might need it. These conversations grow stronger when more people are willing to lean in.
For listeners who want to explore more of Lisa Kristine's humanitarian photography and advocacy, you can find her work through her official website and Human Thread Foundation, where she continues to educate the public and raise awareness about social causes and human dignity. Her TED Talk, Photos That Bear Witness to Modern Slavery, is also an essential place to begin for anyone wanting to understand the power of visual storytelling in this movement. To keep following Lisa's work, visit her official site at lisakristine.com and learn more about the Human Thread Foundation through resources linked from her platform. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about safer communities, and thank you for doing your part to build them. Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at ihavetherightto.org.